This girl reveals the location of a millionaire's wife, but when they find out how she knew, everyone is shocked. Comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know where you are, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The wedding dress remained hanging in the hotel room, untouched, while the guests waited at St. Patrick's Cathedral for over 2 hours. Richard Fairbanks adjusted his tie for the 10th time in those last few minutes, his trembling hands revealing an anxiety he desperately tried to hide. At 47, the mining tycoon had built an empire exploiting the rich quarries of upstate New York. But at that moment, all his wealth couldn't buy the one thing he truly wanted, the presence of Valerie Nichols at the altar. The 38-year-old architect had simply vanished. On the morning that should have been the happiest of their lives, she had left only a note scribbled in haste. "I can't live a lie anymore. Forgive me." The words echoed in Richard's mind like a sentence of doom, each letter etched in his memory with the painful precision of someone who knows the weight of stones well. Ethan Sterling watched the frenetic activity of the hotel staff with a discreet smile on his lips. At 52, Richard's partner had always envied his partner's success, especially his ability to win over women like Valerie. Now seeing the most powerful man in upstate New York reduced to a jilted groom, Ethan felt a satisfaction he could barely conceal. "Richard, we need to cancel the ceremony," Ethan said, approaching with false concern. "The guests are starting to ask questions." "She'll show up," Richard murmured, staring fixedly at his cell phone as if he could materialize a call from Valerie through sheer force of will. Something happened to her. "Valerie wouldn't do this to me." But the hours passed, and the reality became increasingly cruel. Valerie Nichols, the woman who had renovated some of the most important historical buildings in the city, who had breathed new life into the brownstones downtown, had simply evaporated like the morning mist over the Hudson River. Detective Miller arrived at the hotel as the sun was beginning to set, bringing with him the weight of 45 years of experience as a private investigator. Richard had hired him the moment he realized that the situation was more serious than a simple case of pre-wedding jitters. "Mr. Fairbanks, I need you to tell me everything about the last few days before the wedding," Detective Miller said, adjusting his glasses as he opened a well-worn notebook. Any detail could be important. Richard loosened his tie, feeling the fabric like a rope around his neck. Valerie was acting strangely in recent weeks, distant. She said it was the stress of the wedding, but she was asking questions about the company, about the operations in the quarries, things she had never been interested in before. Ethan, who until then had only been observing the conversation, quickly intervened. "Valerie has always been curious about Richard's work. It's natural for a future wife to want to know more about her husband's business." The look that Detective Miller gave Ethan was piercing, like that of someone accustomed to detecting lies. The investigator had noticed how the partner had positioned himself strategically near them, as if he wanted to monitor every word of the conversation. For 3 days, Richard roamed the streets of upstate New York like a man possessed. He visited all the places that Valerie used to frequent: the public library, where she researched colonial architecture; the studio where she drew her designs; the bakery where she always had afternoon coffee. No one had seen her since the eve of the wedding. It was in Central Park, in the heart of the city, that Richard found Lily. The 4-year-old girl was sitting alone under one of the ancient trees, playing with pebbles that she organized into complex patterns on the ground. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her hair disheveled, but there was something in her dark eyes that caught the entrepreneur's attention, an intelligence that seemed disproportionate to her age. "Are you lost, sweetie?" Richard asked, crouching next to the girl. Lily looked up and studied him for a moment, as if she were assessing whether she could trust this well-dressed man. "I'm not lost," she replied in a clear, decisive voice. "I know where everything is. Where's your family?" "Grandma Betty is at the place for sick old people." The way she said it, with a resignation that shouldn't exist in a 4-year-old, broke Richard's heart. "And your parents?" Lily went back to playing with the pebbles, organizing them in a pattern that Richard couldn't understand. "Mommy left when I was a baby. Daddy, I never had one." Richard remained there for a few minutes, watching the girl. There was something mesmerizing about the way she manipulated the stones, creating perfect geometric designs without seeming to try. It was as if she possessed an internal map of how things should be organized in space. "Do you know a woman named Valerie?" he asked, almost without thinking. Lily stopped playing and looked directly into his eyes. "The pretty lady who draws houses." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "You saw her where?" The girl stood up and pointed in a specific direction, beyond the park, where the buildings of the city gave way to the rural lands. "Your wife fell there," she said with the naturalness of someone commenting on the weather. "Fell where, Lily?" "In the deep hole. The place where the water disappeared a long time ago." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. How did this child know about Valerie? And what hole was that? Following Lily's directions, he went to the back of an abandoned rural property on the outskirts of the city, where he found an old well surrounded by dense vegetation. When the authorities arrived to investigate the site, they discovered that the well had been completely dry for decades. There was no trace of Valerie, nor signs that anyone had been there recently. But Lily had been specific. His wife had fallen into that place. How could a 4-year-old who lived on the streets know about Valerie? And why was she so sure about that specific location? The questions multiplied in Richard's mind as he watched the girl, who continued organizing her pebbles as if keeping secrets were the most natural thing in the world. That night, Richard made a decision that would change the course of his life. He couldn't leave Lily on the streets, especially after she had shown that she knew something about Valerie's disappearance. There was a connection there, something he couldn't yet understand, but that his instinct told him was crucial to finding answers. Lily's first days in Richard's mansion were marked by a disturbing silence. The girl walked through the spacious hallways like a ghost, touching the marble walls with a contained curiosity, but rarely speaking beyond what was necessary. Richard had hired a nurse, Connie, to take care of her temporarily, but Lily seemed to prefer her own company. "She doesn't eat right," Connie reported on the third morning. "And when she sleeps, she keeps muttering strange things. Numbers, directions, as if she were following a map in her head." Richard watched the girl from the window of his office. Lily was in the garden, organizing fallen leaves into complex geometric patterns, the same obsessive precision she had demonstrated with the pebbles in the park. There was something about her that both bothered and fascinated him, a premature maturity that didn't match her age. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Detective Miller. "Mr. Fairbanks, I need to talk to you urgently. I've discovered something about Valerie that could change everything." An hour later, Detective Miller was in Richard's office, with a folder full of documents and photographs spread out on the mahogany table. The investigator seemed tense, like someone who had discovered something he would rather not know. "Valerie wasn't just asking casual questions about your company," Detective Miller began, adjusting his glasses. "She was investigating, systematically." "Investigating what?" "The environmental permits of the quarries, the safety reports, the records of workplace accidents." Detective Miller passed a series of documents to Richard. "She has been in contact with the State Environmental Agency for the last 6 weeks before the wedding." Richard felt his stomach contract. "That's impossible." "Valerie never showed any interest in environmental issues." "Yes, she did, Mr. Fairbanks, and more than that." Detective Miller removed a photograph from the folder. This photo was taken 3 days before the wedding. Valerie talking to an employee of the environmental agency in front of the regional office. The image showed Valerie in an apparently serious conversation with a man in a suit, holding a folder similar to the one that Detective Miller was now presenting. Richard studied his fiancée's expression in the photo, determined, almost stern. It was a Valerie he didn't recognize. "Why would she do that?" Richard murmured, more to himself than to the investigator. "That's the million-dollar question," Detective Miller replied. "But I have a theory." Someone convinced her that there were irregularities in the operations of Fairbanks Mining. The question is who and why? At that moment, Ethan entered the office without knocking, as he always did. His habitual smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw the documents scattered on the table, but he recovered quickly. "Sorry to barge in. I came to see how you're dealing with the situation." Richard quickly gathered the papers, but not before Ethan managed to glimpse some of the photographs. "We're making progress." "What kind of progress?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying a curiosity that seemed excessive for a simple concerned partner. "Nothing concrete yet," Detective Miller replied, watching Ethan carefully. "But some interesting clues about Miss Valerie's last days." Ethan remained there for a few more minutes, asking seemingly innocent questions, but Richard noticed how his partner seemed especially interested in knowing exactly what they had discovered. When Ethan finally left, Detective Miller leaned forward. "Mr. Fairbanks, I need to ask you a delicate question. Do you trust your partner completely?" The question hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. Ethan had been his partner for over 10 years. They had built the company together, but on second thought, there had always been something in the way Ethan looked at him, a competitiveness that sometimes seemed to cross professional boundaries. "Why are you asking that?" "Because someone with internal access to your company provided information to Valerie. Someone who knew specific details about the operations that would not be publicly available." During the following days, Richard began to pay more attention to his interactions with Ethan, and what he saw disturbed him deeply. His partner asked subtle questions about Lily, demonstrated an excessive interest in the financial reports that he had previously left entirely to Richard, and had begun to question business decisions that he had never challenged before. "Don't you think you're getting too distracted with this child?" Ethan said during a meeting. "The company needs your full attention, especially now that we're expanding operations at the North Quarry." "Lily isn't a distraction," Richard replied, feeling an instinctive protection for the girl. "She needs care." Of course. But maybe an orphanage or a suitable family would be better for her. A child needs stability, not the resources of a busy single man." There was something in the way Ethan spoke about Lily that bothered Richard. It was as if he wanted the girl to disappear, to be removed from the equation. But why? What threat could a 4-year-old pose to someone like Ethan? The answer began to form when Lily led him to an unexpected discovery. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Richard had decided to spend time with the girl in the garden. She was, as always, organizing objects, this time small stones that she had collected during her walks around the property. "Lily, where did you learn to make these drawings?" he asked, observing the perfect geometric patterns she created. "Grandma Betty taught me," she replied without looking up. "She said it's important to remember where things are." "Remember where things are?" Lily finally looked at him. "Grandma worked at the big house a long time ago. She knew all the secret places." "What big house?" "The house where you lived when you were little." Richard felt the world spin around him. "Lily, do you know the house where I grew up?" The girl nodded and stood up, walking towards the back of the property. "Grandma showed me in the photos. She said she took care of you when your mommy left." With his heart pounding, Richard followed Lily to a corner of the garden that he rarely visited. There, under an old tree, the girl began to dig in the dirt with her small hands. In a few minutes, she had unearthed a rusty metal box. "Grandma hid it here before she got sick," Lily explained, handing the box to Richard. "She said someday someone would need it." Inside the box, Richard found old photographs, images of his childhood that he hadn't seen in decades. There were photos of him playing in the garden, always accompanied by a black woman with a kind smile, Betty. He remembered her vaguely, a caring presence in his turbulent childhood, especially after his parents separated. But there was more in the box. Old documents, letters, and mainly a series of photographs that showed Betty working at the Fairbanks mansion 3 decades ago. In one of them, she was holding a small girl, not Lily, but someone older. "Lily, who is this girl in the photo with Grandma Betty?" "Mommy," she answered simply. Grandma took care of her too when she was little. The revelation hit Richard like an avalanche. Lily's mother had grown up in his house, cared for by Betty. There was a connection between their families that stretched for generations, a link that he had completely forgotten until that moment. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Richard called Detective Miller. "I need you to investigate a woman named Betty. She worked at my house about 30 years ago, and I need to know everything about her daughter too. Any specific reason?" Richard looked out the window towards the room where Lily was sleeping. "Because I'm starting to suspect that Valerie's disappearance and this girl's presence in my life are not coincidences." The next day, Ethan showed up at the mansion with an unexpected proposal. "Richard, I've been thinking about your situation. I know an excellent family who would like to adopt Lily. Good people with resources who can give her the education and care she deserves." "No." Richard's response was immediate and firm. "But you need to think rationally. A child needs stability, a structured family. You're going through a difficult time with Valerie's disappearance." I said no, Ethan. Richard stood up from his chair, his voice carrying an authority that his partner had rarely heard. "Lily stays with me." The expression that crossed Ethan's face lasted only a second, but Richard caught it perfectly. It was irritation, almost anger, as if the refusal had ruined some carefully crafted plan. When Ethan left the mansion that afternoon, Richard was sure of one thing: his partner wasn't trying to help. He was trying to remove Lily from the equation. The question was why, and the answer, Richard suspected, was closely connected with Valerie's disappearance. The St. Vincent's retirement home was on the outskirts of upstate New York, a grey building that contrasted sadly with the tropical exuberance of the region. Richard held Lily's hand as they walked down the corridor that smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. The girl had insisted on visiting Grandma Betty, and after the discoveries of the buried box, Richard knew that he needed answers that only the old lady could provide. "She sometimes doesn't remember things," Lily murmured, squeezing Richard's hand. "But when I talk about the old days, she gets clearer." Betty was sitting in a wheelchair near the window of the shared room, her white hair tied in a simple bun, her eyes still alive despite her 72 years and the after-effects of the stroke. When she saw Richard, she blinked several times, as if trying to adjust the focus of a distant memory. "Little Richard?" she whispered, extending a trembling hand. "You've grown so much, Miss Betty," Richard said, crouching next to the chair. "Do you remember me?" "How could I forget? I took care of you when your mother went out with the rich men." Betty smiled tenderly. "You always asked why she didn't stay home, why you didn't have a father like the other children." The words brought back painful memories that Richard had buried deep. His mother, Dolores Fairbanks, a beautiful but unstable woman, who had abandoned him to the care of maids while pursuing relationships that promised social status. Betty had been the only constant in his chaotic childhood. "Miss Betty, I need to know about your daughter," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lily's mother." Betty's face clouded over. "My Josephine. She went to work in the quarries when she turned 18. She said she was going to save money to move us out of here, to give a better life to her little girl." Josephine worked at the mine. Yes, she did. She was smart, she knew numbers and maps. The man who hired her said she had a knack for it. Betty stopped, her eyes filling with tears. But then the accident happened. Lily approached her grandmother and climbed onto her lap with the naturalness of someone who had done it thousands of times. "Grandma, tell Uncle Richard about the stones that Mommy found." Betty stroked the girl's hair. Josephine had a special gift. She could see where there were good stones inside the earth, where the water passed, where the ground was firm or soft. As if she had a map in her head, Richard felt a shiver. Like Lily, the girl took after her mother. Since she was little, she knows where everything is. But that can be dangerous. Dangerous how? Betty looked around as if afraid of being heard. When Josephine found out things she shouldn't have found out at the quarry, they made her stay quiet forever. The words froze Richard's blood. What kind of things did she find out? Places where they were taking stone without permission, tunnels that went beyond what was allowed. And there was more. Betty hesitated, her hands trembling. There were people working who didn't exist on paper. People who weren't getting paid right, who were sleeping on the stones themselves. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Miller, whom Richard had called to accompany the visit. The investigator greeted Betty respectfully before joining the conversation. "Miss Betty, did you keep anything of your daughters? Documents, photographs?" "Yes, I did," she replied, pointing to a small cabinet next to the bed. "But I don't know if it's all still there. After I got here, some people came to ask questions about Josephine." Detective Miller and Richard exchanged glances. "What kind of people?" "A man in a nice suit. He said he was from the company where she worked. He wanted to know if she had left anything important. Do you remember his name?" Betty closed her eyes, concentrating. Ethan something. He was very polite, but he had hard eyes. The impact of the revelation was like lightning. Ethan had been there, investigating Lily's family, looking for something specific. But what? And why had he never mentioned to Richard that he knew Josephine's story? "Miss Betty, did this man take anything?" "Yes, he did. Some papers that Josephine had hidden here before the accident. She said that if something happened to her, I should keep them well hidden." Betty began to cry softly. "But he said it was important to the company, that they were going to help other people who worked in the quarries." Detective Miller got up and began to examine the cabinet. At the bottom of a drawer, he found some photographs and a small notebook that Ethan had apparently overlooked. "Look at this," Detective Miller said, showing a photograph. "Is this Josephine?" The image showed a young black woman, approximately 20 years old, wearing a safety helmet and holding some papers in front of one of the Fairbanks mining quarries. She had the same intelligent expression as Lily, the same intensity in her eyes. Richard studied the photo carefully. In the background, he could see part of the North Quarry, the same one that Ethan had mentioned, was expanding. But there was something wrong with the image. The area shown seemed much larger than the official concession he remembered approving. "Detective Miller, can you verify the legal boundaries of the North Quarry?" "Already on it," the investigator replied, putting away the photograph. "If Josephine discovered irregular operations, that would explain why someone would want to silence her," Richard completed, the terrible reality beginning to form in his mind. During the drive back to the city, Lily remained quiet in the back seat. But Richard could see her in the rearview mirror organizing small objects that she had collected at the retirement home. Buttons, scraps of paper, a coin, creating her usual geometric patterns. "Lily, do you remember your mother?" "A little," she replied, "but sometimes I dream about her. She's always walking underground, looking for lost things." The girl's words sent a shiver down Richard's spine. "Underground?" "In the tunnels. Mommy knew all the tunnels under the stones." Detective Miller turned to look at the girl. "Lily, have you ever been in those tunnels?" "I can't go there," she said quickly. "Grandma said it's dangerous, but I know where they start and where they end." That night, after Lily went to sleep, Richard and Detective Miller gathered in the mansion's office to analyze the notebook found at the retirement home. The pages were filled with technical notes in a careful feminine handwriting, measurements, coordinates, and mainly detailed maps of the quarry's underground tunnels. Josephine was more than just an ordinary employee, Detective Miller observed. She was a kind of self-taught geologist. These maps are incredibly accurate. "And they show tunnels that go far beyond our legal concession," Richard added, comparing the drawings with the company's official documents. "If this is true, Fairbanks Mining has been operating illegally for years. The question is, did you know about it?" Richard shook his head. "Ethan always took care of the operational side. I focused on the finances and the main contracts. I trusted him completely. And now we know that he was at the retirement home, looking for these exact documents." Richard's phone rang. It was Ethan. "Richard, we need to talk urgently. There's a serious problem with the North Quarry operations." "What kind of problem?" "Environmental problems. Looks like we're facing an investigation." "We better prepare." Richard looked at Detective Miller, who was listening to the conversation. "Where do you want to meet?" "At the quarry itself. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I need to show you some things in person." When Richard hung up the phone, Detective Miller was somber. "He knows we're investigating, and now he wants to take you exactly to the place where everything happened. You think it's a trap? I think Ethan is desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things." That dawn, Richard was awakened by a strange sound coming from Lily's room. When he opened the door, he found the girl sitting on the bed, drawing frantically on a paper with a crayon. "Lily, what are you doing?" She looked up, her eyes shining with a disturbing intensity. "I dreamed about the pretty lady again. Valerie. She's calling from a dark place. A place underground where there's water, but the water doesn't come out." Richard approached and looked at the drawing. It was a rudimentary but surprisingly detailed map, showing connected tunnels and a central area marked with an X. "Lily, where does this knowledge come from?" "Mommy taught me before she left. She said someday I would need to find the lost things." Richard studied the drawing more closely. The tunnels corresponded exactly to the maps found in Josephine's notebook. But there was a crucial difference. Lily had marked a specific location that did not appear in her mother's drawings. "What's this X here, Lily?" The girl looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "It's where the pretty lady is waiting. But we can only go there when it's safe." "When will it be safe?" "When the bad man stops looking." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Lily knew where Valerie was. Somehow, impossibly, that 4-year-old child held the key to solving the mystery that had consumed his life in recent weeks. But first, he needed to confront Ethan and find out how far his partner's betrayal went. The morning arrived heavy with clouds that promised rain, and Richard decided not to go alone to the meeting with Ethan. Detective Miller would accompany him, hidden, while he confronted his partner at the North Quarry. But before leaving, he needed to make sure that Lily was safe. "Connie, don't let the girl leave the house for anything," Richard instructed the nurse. "And if anyone comes looking for her, you call me immediately." Lily was in the living room, organizing her pebbles in a pattern that seemed even more complex than the previous ones. As Richard approached to say goodbye, she looked up with a worried expression. "Don't go to the deep hole today," she said. "The pretty lady said in the dream that it's not time yet." "Lily, I need to go." "It's important." "Then take this," she said, handing him one of the pebbles she had organized. "When you need to find the way back, squeeze it in your hand and think of me." Richard put the stone in his pocket, touched by the girl's seriousness. "I'll be back soon, okay?" The North Quarry was 40 minutes from the city, a vast scar on the landscape where huge machines had been tearing stones from the ground for more than a decade. When Richard arrived, Ethan was already there, accompanied by 2 men he didn't recognize, workers with a rough appearance and hostile expressions. "Richard, thanks for coming," Ethan said, but there was something forced in his usual cordiality. "We need to resolve this situation before it gets out of control." "What situation exactly?" Ethan led him near one of the edges of the quarry, where he could see the full extent of the operations. "The environmental agencies have discovered that we are operating beyond the legal limits." "For years. And you didn't tell me about this?" "I tried to protect you," Ethan said, but his eyes avoided direct contact. "I thought I could solve it without you knowing. But now Valerie found out everything and you had to make her disappear," Richard said, deciding to get straight to the point. Ethan's face changed completely. The mask of friendly concern fell, revealing a cold, calculating expression. "So you know." "I know that you were at the retirement home, looking for the documents that Josephine had left. I know that you knew about the illegal operations from the beginning. And I know that Valerie found out all of this." Ethan laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the empty quarry. "Valerie was too curious for her own good. Just like the mother of that girl you insist on protecting. Where's Valerie?" "In a safe place. For now," Ethan signaled to the 2 men who approached. "The question now is what to do with you." It was at that moment that Detective Miller emerged from behind one of the machines, accompanied by 2 bailiffs and a prosecutor from the district attorney's office. "Mr. Ethan Sterling, you are under arrest for coercion, kidnapping, and illegal mining operation." The expression of surprise on Ethan's face lasted only a second before turning into fury. "You have no proof of anything. We have the documents that Miss Josephine left. We have Betty's testimony, and mainly," the prosecutor said, "we have the recordings of the entire conversation you just had." Detective Miller showed a small recorder that had been running throughout the meeting. "You confessed to involvement in the disappearance of Valerie Nichols." As Ethan was being detained, he shouted to Richard, "You think this solves everything? Your precious fiancée discovered much more than illegal operations. She discovered about the tunnels, about what really happened to Josephine." "What do you mean?" "Ask that strange girl you're raising. She knows everything." "She always knew." After Ethan was taken away, Richard met with Detective Miller and the authorities to plan Valerie's rescue. Based on the information collected, and mainly on the map that Lily had drawn, they had an idea of where she might be hidden. "The old tunnels connect several parts of the property," Detective Miller explained. "If Valerie is trapped somewhere underground, it will be difficult to find her without a guide." "I know who can guide us," Richard said, thinking of Lily. When they returned to the mansion, they found the girl exactly where Richard had left her, but now her pebbles were organized differently. They formed an arrow that pointed to the back of the property. "Now we can go," she said simply, as if she knew exactly what had happened at the quarry. "Lily, how do you know?" The pretty lady told me in the dream. She said the bad man can't hurt her anymore. With a full rescue team, including firefighters and paramedics, the group followed Lily through a trail that led to a remote part of the rural property, where the abandoned well that she had shown Richard weeks before was located. "Not at the well," Lily said, passing right by it. "It's in the house under the house." She led them to an almost imperceptible entrance, hidden by dense vegetation, the opening of a tunnel that seemed to have been dug decades ago. As they descended, following the firefighters' lanterns, the tunnel revealed itself to be an impressive engineering feat, with reinforced walls and several branches. "Josephine helped map these tunnels," Lily explained as they walked. "Mommy said they were made to hide the stones they were taking without permission." After almost an hour of underground walking, they reached a larger chamber where they found signs of recent habitation, blankets, food supplies, and mainly several piles of carefully organized documents. "Valerie!" Richard shouted, his voice echoing through the tunnels. A weak voice responded from a side passage. "Richard, is that really you?" When they finally found her, Valerie was weak but conscious, sitting in a corner of a small chamber with a notebook in her lap. She had spent weeks documenting everything she had discovered about the mine's illegal operations, creating a complete archive of Ethan's criminal activities. "I couldn't come back," she explained as she was being attended to by the paramedics. "Ethan said that if I showed up at the wedding or told you what I had discovered, he would do to Lily what he did to her mother." "What did he do to Josephine?" Valerie looked at Lily, who had approached and was holding her hand. "He caused the accident that killed her." Josephine had discovered that Ethan was diverting company resources and using illegal workers in the tunnels. When she threatened to expose everything, Ethan arranged for her to have an accident at the quarry, Richard completed, the terrible truth finally revealing itself. But before she died, Josephine taught Lily where to find all the evidence. She trained the girl to memorize the maps, to know where everything was hidden. Valerie stroked the girl's face. "Lily is more than special. She has a rare neurological condition that gives her an extraordinary photographic memory. That's why she always knows where things are," Richard murmured, finally understanding. "Josephine was a trained geologist," Valerie continued. "She had been hired by Ethan precisely for her knowledge. But when she discovered that he was using that knowledge for criminal operations, she tried to do the right thing." Lily approached Richard and said, "Mommy taught me to wait until someone good came who could help. She said that one day I would find a man who had a broken heart like hers, and that we would help each other." In the months that followed, the full truth came to light. Ethan had indeed orchestrated Josephine's death and spent years diverting resources from Fairbanks mining to personal accounts, using the illegal operations as a source of side income. When Valerie discovered everything through her own investigation, he threatened her and then held her prisoner in the tunnels, waiting to find a way to silence her permanently. The discovery of Lily's neurological condition scientifically explained her seemingly mystical abilities. She possessed a rare form of eidetic memory, combined with an exceptional capacity for spatial navigation, skills that her mother had recognized and carefully cultivated. Richard decided to shut down the mine's illegal operations and turn the area into a reforestation project, honoring Josephine's memory and creating a positive legacy from the tragedy. Valerie, who recovered completely from her ordeal, agreed to marry him, but on completely new grounds of honesty and transparency. Betty was transferred to a private clinic where she received the best available treatment, and her condition improved significantly. Lily was officially adopted by Richard and Valerie, who established an educational fund for children with special needs in the area. At the wedding ceremony, much simpler and more intimate than originally planned, Lily served as a flower girl, carrying rings that symbolized not only the union of the couple, but the overcoming of a history of pain and injustice. Ethan faced the legal consequences of his actions, being convicted of manslaughter, kidnapping, and environmental crimes. 3 years later, Lily attended a special school where her unique abilities were valued and developed. She had become a happy and confident child, surrounded by the love of a family that understood and celebrated her differences. On a sunny afternoon while watching Lily play in the mansion's garden, now organizing flowers into geometric patterns instead of pebbles, Richard reflected on how fate had intertwined their lives in such a complex and ultimately redeeming way. The girl who had appeared in his life at the moment of greatest despair was not just a child in need of help. She was the key to justice, the bridge between the past and the future, and mainly the proof that even in the most desperate circumstances, love and truth can prevail when people choose to do what is right. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.